Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me along to the Malagasy Grassy Biomes Workshop. My name's Simon Haberle, and I'm from the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. And I'm here pretty much because of many of my key research interests over the years have really do lend something, I guess, to the questions that we're trying to answer here, and hopefully some of the work we've recently been doing in Madagascar actually is able to contribute in a positive way as well. So I'll take you through some of that in this short talk. But essentially, I'm interested through my work in pollen and charcoal analysis in sediment cores, but trace the influence of people on ecosystems across a range of timescales and look at what are the key drivers that also change ecosystems at any point in time, whether that be people or climate or other features. And of course, it's important to think of what all this means in terms of past and present and future conservation and management of these ecosystems that we're studying. So I guess there was a lot of thought about this, has been mentioned by David Burney and others in this series of videos about the notion of origins of the grasslands. It has a deep sort of history, I guess, of thought, and of course around the southern hemisphere there's these kind of intriguing grasslands that occur in regions that are climatically suited to forests, and that's in Australia around Tasmania, islands like that, and New Zealand. These grasslands occur, and their origin has always been a bit of a puzzle. Paleoecology can play a major role in that, alongside other information such as archaeology and ecology, of course. But the reason to go to Madagascar was many reasons, of course, but we were particularly intrigued by this linguistic idea that the languages are coming from Southeast Asia and indicative of early human occupation of the island of Madagascar, derived from this direction. And so to look at that in more detail, one way of doing it is, of course, look at the islands across the Indian Ocean for evidence of sailing populations moving there and then arriving in Madagascar. And of course, this is a long issue of thought and discovery in historical texts, as well as archaeology and paleoecology. We were able to visit a number of these islands on a research grants we obtained, and I'll show you some of the results that have come from that work. And of course, a lot of this work comes off the back of some really wonderful research in the past by David and others, but also clearly many of the Malagasy researchers that are now really interested in this, and it's wonderful to see the videos in this collection for this workshop from really inspiring young researchers coming out of Madagascar. So hopefully this work sort of contributes and helps along that way. Some of the work we did around Andalanombi, Embolisatra fossil pollen site and bone site has been particularly interesting. We certainly revisited there, cored and excavated some more bone material, and that's been published and recorded, and some of the results show quite intriguing results that tend to support this notion of quite late human occupation in this region, an idea that's obviously heavily under debate and will be discussed in this workshop, I'm sure, but one that, at least from the evidence we've been gathering, tends to support the notion of quite a late human occupation. And of course, the kind of analysis we're doing with our pollen data in particular, and looking at resilience and susceptibility of many of these ecosystems to climate change, also an important issue that we've been looking at with our research. This is the kind of data that was coming out of that site. Relatively fine resolution look at the charcoal record in particular, and fine radiocarbon dating as well as applied to this site. and suggests that really the major shifts, particularly in burning of the landscape, really begins in earnest around 1100 years BP and is likely linked to human arrival and intensified activity. This is in a background of quite a dynamic climate environment in the southwest of Madagascar, dry landscape, but obviously impacted by periods of drying and wetting through the past as well. And this data obviously contributed to sort of evaluation of and dating program that led us to this publication, which suggests that megafaunal bone damage in particular is only really securely indicating late colonisation of Madagascar. And this is argued in this paper, but of course, as I mentioned, this is open to a lot of debate at the moment, and it's a quite interesting discussion to see where this falls in the long run. But certainly, this multidisciplinary approach to answering these questions through the archaeology, through the paleoecology, genomics, linguistic history, all lead us to be able to really interrogate these questions with a great deal of detail. And there's images here just show some of that dating of bone used to indicate quite a late extinction of some of the megafauna, and in one case at least at Talimbibi showing the charcoal record alongside that, indicating a kind of persistent increase from the time of the last recorded megafaunal extinction at that site. Again, implicating human activity in that process. Of course, Sean Hickson has presented some of his really detailed and amazing work that's suggesting a similar sort of late spread of pastoralism, coinciding with endemic megafauna extinction, and some of the information we were able to gather contributed to this work, but essentially again a really fascinating exploration of the dynamics of animal faunal extinction and what impact that has on the landscape and how people influence that extinction through time. Some of the sites we haven't yet been able to publish, but I thought I'd mention here. One, really fortunate to be able to gather it during the field trip. A man who many of us have worked with, Ramila-san, who's Malagasy, living in Antananarivo, and in his garden plot he sort of invited me down to take a core from that site, one of these swamplands near the centre of the city of Antananarivo, and remarkably we were able to extract a over 27,000 year old record, which is detailed here with the radiocarbon age depth curve. But yeah, the potential of developing these really long records is quite remarkable, and we've seen some evidence of that from David's early work and others who are working in the highlands, central Madagascar, showing the long-term history of vegetation change. And again, in this case, in this quite remarkable site, we see grasses persisting through the Holocene and even back into the late Pleistocene. Obviously quite dynamic in terms of, particularly during the Pleistocene, the dominance of ericaceous shrub, and that's a well-known phenomenon, but certainly grasslands, wetlands were persistent and evident throughout the entirety of this record. And interestingly enough, fire is also very important, particularly in that late Pleistocene period, late glacial transition. You can see here the significant spike in charcoal at around the time of the Younger Dryas, which is quite intriguing, suggests that perhaps significant climate changes during that period led to extensive fires. And I think at this stage we would suggest those fires are naturally driven, climate derived, and indicative of a quite dynamic climate period in the northern hemisphere at least, around the Younger Dryas. So more work we'll be looking at doing more work on that to actually tease out exactly what the driver of that particular fire event was. But clearly fire is persistent and occurs throughout this period. It becomes more intensive around 1,000 years ago in this region, or a bit over 1,000 years, 1,200 years ago, and we would suggest that's indicative of arrival of people and the expansion of rice in this area as a major cultivar. And finally, we were very lucky not only just to go to Madagascar, but its nearest neighbours of the Comoros, and these are intriguing because they potentially are the kind of stepping stones from the mainland of Africa through to Madagascar, if this is a route of migration, and discovering exactly what the paleo-environments of these islands were like is key to this problem, I think. And here we show, in this case, it's Alison Crowther and the team from Max Planck showed that there's a very clear archaeobotany signature showing the dominance of Asian crops in the Madagascar-Comoros region around the first arrival of people, signifying the strength of this argument of people coming from Southeast Asia into Madagascar and as first occupants. And of course the early pollen records that we're starting to develop from Anjouan, one of the islands in the Comoros, sort of shows quite clearly these very strong indicators of particularly Southeast Asian crops such as taro. Of course then things like cotton and rice appear as well around 1000 AD, and suggesting that we really are starting to see arrival of people into this system, and right up until spice trees arrive in the sort of colonial period. And fire obviously is playing a major role in this case as well as a sort of subsistence management tool, as indicated in this particular record. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of where my work sits in this whole argument, and I'm really intrigued to hear what people talk about and discuss in this workshop. And certainly I know many of these questions are still wide open, but through this sort of integrated work that we're trying to do, and this workshop that has been put together, I think there's a really wonderful opportunity to explore these questions in further detail. So thank you, and I hope I can turn up at some of these talks. It'll be midnight to 1 a.m. I think, but I'll try and contribute in whatever way possible. So thank you for that opportunity.